Good evening and welcome to the Savvy Street Show. We have another episode of the Deep State Inquiry. And as usual, we have a distinguished guest. It's Michael Rectenwald. He's the Chief Academic Officer and co-founder of American Scholars, a pro-American education platform. And he was a professor of liberal studies at NYU from 2008 to 2019. Interestingly, he's a former Marxist who's now pro-capitalism. And he's getting well known as the anti-woke professor. He told us that his latest book, he's an author of 11 books, and he's appeared on several shows, including Tucker Carlson Tonight, The Glenn Beck Show, Fox and Friends, several other syndicated radio shows. But this is interesting. His latest book, he calls it, the title is The Great Reset, How Capitalists Became Marxists. And I find that ironic because he was a Marxist who's become a capitalist or pro-capitalism. He's writing a book about capitalists becoming Marxists. So that's what we're here to talk about, The Great Reset. So welcome to the show, Michael Rectenwald.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Thank you. So my first question is, sometime in your youth, I guess, you became a Marxist. Yeah. And then you transformed into a pro-liberty warrior. What were those two phases? The first one, why did you become Marxist? Secondly, why did you leave it?
Yeah, so I think there was a unconscious absorption of Marxist ethos and ideas, even before I read anything of Marxism, going all the way back to my teenage years and growing up in the city of Pittsburgh. And I think that there was a subtle propaganda that I was exposed to. And it came through the television largely. And I think, I remember when I was a tennis coach, and the league rules for the teams were we couldn't keep score. And I thought that was wonderful. And I realized, they were actually promoting a kind of socialism in a sense, this kind of communitarianism at that time. And then anyway, I became a full-fledged Marxist in my 20s, late 20s, after I left a career in advertising and went back to academia and got suddenly very versed in Marxism. And I really didn't go back to academia to become a well-schooled Marxist, but this is what we had to read. We had to read that. We had to read a lot of postmodern theory, a lot of Marxist theory. And there was never any question about whether this stuff had any validity. It was just, these are the masters. Marx is the master. The question is, do you understand it? And I got more involved, and suddenly I was a Marxist within about a year and of this graduate school education, and just build on it from there, started writing Marxist texts. And I mean, this wasn't my academic work. I was doing work in the history of science and culture in British 19th century Britain. But I did a lot of avocational writing in Marxist ideas, and published on numerous Marxist periodicals and so forth. It all came back to, you had to embrace some sort of leftism in the academy, and Marxism was the one that seemed to suit me best. I didn't have any special identity category. I wasn't a special snowflake, so I had no snowflake status. And so anyway, furthermore, I think that deep down, I never really was thoroughly convinced. There's a sense of me that it was very fiercely independent at all times, all the time, and that I didn't like to be dictated to in terms of what I would think. So whenever the social justice crowd started getting really active in 2016 in the fall, I made some criticisms of them. And first of all, I started a Twitter account where I was ripping on them. It was then called the anti-PC NYU prof, which now the anti-woke prof. And I started to rip on social justice, and wasn't called wokeness yet, actually, but what became wokeness. And then I got interviewed by the student newspaper, and I decided to let them run with the interview, attaching it to my name. And then all hell broke loose in the university, and I got savagely attacked by the social justice warriors there, the diversity, equity, and inclusion group, and forced into a leave of absence. And everything, it all started to unravel from there. It wasn't long. Just put it this way: I was a Marxist in September, late and into October, and then by November I voted for Trump. So.
All right, that late. So 2016 was your transformation.
It started it, yeah, big time. And then I started to read the Austrian School of Economics. First of all, I studied the history of political leftist criminality, Black Book of Communism, and dug a lot in the Stalinist digital archive, and did a lot of research into political criminality of the left. And really came to this point where I thought, how has this all been hidden from me all this time? And so then the economic part came through the Austrian school, reading Mises, reading Rothbard, reading a little bit of Hayek. I don't like him as much. Reading Hoppe, Hans Hermann Hoppe, and that really did it. And just been building this now, and all my books are informed by an anti-totalitarian position since Springtime for Snowflakes.
All right, thank you. That's a fantastic. I didn't know that transformation occurred only kind of 6 years or less, 5.5 years ago. So
yeah,
thank you for sharing that. Now, if I may, this is a long question, so just please bear with me. I want to tie in two different things. One is a famous Marxist by the name of Antonio Gramsci.
Yeah.
And he was pretty much active in the early part of the 20th century and throughout. But one of his students in the 60s gave Gramsci's theory a name, the Long March Through the Institutions.
Right.
And Gramsci spoke about going into churches and different societies, corporations, education, everywhere. And then now, parallelly, I want to define what I call the deep state, because that's what we're discussing. So here's my definition today. It's slightly different. A network of high-level people in academia, the education sector, the media, think tanks, large corporates, government-established organizations such as CIA, NASA, NSA, and so on, and NGOs seeking to influence culture and enact policies, laws, and regulations. So kind of an extra legal, big, deep network. Now, the problem I have even in my own mind is, why is deep state dominantly unipolar? I mean, it's no surprise for a think tank to have an aim, an objective to influence culture. That's what they're on about. Same with education, same with, if we publish pro-capitalism views, we are seeking to influence culture as well. So has Gramsci's Long March succeeded? Is that why? Is there a deep state, and is that broadly unipolar, dominantly of one mind?
Yes, I think that's true. I think that Gramsci's idea of cultural Marxism, what's come to be called cultural Marxism, has succeeded. That is, this kind of attempt to overtake educational and other institutions in order to inaugurate socialist, replace rather capitalist or bourgeois ideology with socialist ideology. I think it has permeated not only academia, but every institution. You've mentioned a number of them, all the way into the State Department and the alphabet agencies and into corporations. So yeah, this is what's happened. And there's a reason for it, and we can get into that. There's a reason why this has happened. It is uniform, as you put it. It's homogeneous across the board, ideologically, and they are foisting on us. You know, it used to be the CIA was running around installing anti-communist dictators. Now they're actually promoting socialism. So this is a very curious development, and I think I have the explanation for it. And it really has been successful. Why did these people adopt this? First of all, there was a lot of cultural power coming out of it, but also it suits their needs at this time. This is very much in line with their interests now.
Okay, so we're in for a large sort of crony culture, but I think in one of your other talks you mentioned there is no master puppeteer as such.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
it's ideology that binds. It isn't like there is a propaganda campaign. There is a desideratum amongst the elite to foist and amongst some elites. Of course, there might be some conflict within the elite. Nevertheless, the most powerful contingent is propagating all these ideologies, or this particular ideology, and they're being successful. And it's actually taking up a lot of people that do things don't know why they're doing them. They're just minions that are following orders and the trends, you know. But this has become, a very insidiously subversive, surreptitious development that has actually undermined the ideological framework of the whole Western culture, I think.
Okay, and so Gramsci succeeded after 100 years or so. They won a lot of territory without ever lifting a gun in this culture sphere. And let's go over to the World Economic Forum, which is curious. As I understand, it's funded primarily by 1,000 corporates of turnover over $5 billion US. So money is coming from corporates.
Yep.
And there's no master plan to say the WEF should be the spokesperson as such for the deep state, but it appears to be. Is that your observation?
Well, yeah. I mean, they signed an agreement with the United Nations in 2019. Their language, their ideas, I think stakeholder capitalism, which I've tried to track to its roots, and I believe it actually does originate with Klaus Schwab in his book, his first book in 1971, something about mechanical engineering and economics. I forget the exact title. I could look it up, but he introduced this idea of the stakeholder. And then, founded the European Management Forum. That's what it was first. And then it changed its name to the World Economic Forum. And there are over 1,000 corporate partners signed on, and they are the source of funding. And they are also the executors of one of the major executors of the plan, of the ideas that the World Economic Forum is hoping to get adopted. And in fact, they're getting it adopted in major places. So it's not like they're pulling strings, but they're working hard to influence and have a real effect on the economy, on the social order in general, not just the economy.
Which is quite disturbing. In another one of your talks, you mentioned that they're aiming, or they want, a two-tiered society: the elite, the billionaires, the big CEOs, and the Schwabs of the world, and crush the middle class, crush the upper middle class, and then the rest of us live on, a UBI or something like that.
Yeah.
Or is it that, or can they tolerate? Because it's not easy to construct a society like that. Or will they tolerate, good engineers, scientists, academics, and so on, kind of middle class, upper middle class, so long as that upper middle class and middle class obeys the narrative, is compliant with the narrative, it won't be whitewashed. So which one?
No,
I
I think
feel
that's a
it's more the
great
latter.
point. That's
Yeah.
a great point. And they never come out and say, look, we're trying to get rid of the middle and upper middle class. Naturally, they put it in these euphemistic terms like fairness and equity. But what you have to, what one has to do is interpret what they're saying and seeing what the outcome would be should their policies be in effect. And what it does is, especially using the ESG score and other things, the environmental, social, and governance index, it does look to be that they're squeezing out businesses that are not going to abide. Now, they're not going to be fully successful, as you pointed out to me. Warren Buffett is a detractor, and they will permit a professional class, but if you're not on board with the narrative, you'll probably be canceled, especially if you're vocally discordant. You are not going to be able to survive as a dissident in this realm. They're going to eliminate dissidents, and they're eliminating them now. So yeah, that's a good point. There will be a professional class. They want to absorb that class into their orbit.
Yeah, into their hierarchy. And speaking of Buffett, I mean, the term stakeholder, I did an MBA almost 25 years ago. The term stakeholder was not new. It was stakeholder capitalism, and it's the force and its
Yes,
aims
right.
and motives, and it's a contradiction actually within terms. So we, as you pointed out, we have now BlackRock, which is managing, I think, $10 trillion US in assets, Vanguard, 7 trillion. So they're much larger than Berkshire Hathaway. And even Warren Buffett, even though he's a dissident, he eventually, I think he has to comply, because the fiduciary obligation is to serve the interest of the investors for both Fink and for both BlackRock and Berkshire. But if you get this kind of law and regulation against coal-fired, I was on the board of a coal-fired company some years ago, coal-fired power station company, and then you discuss in the board whether we need to diversify into renewable, whether we believe it or not, in terms of whether we believe climate alarmism or not. Our fiduciary interest is to shareholders. So that forces your hand. Is that what is going to happen to Buffett? And
that's what they're doing. Yeah. So there's different pressures. There's pressures from the top, such as people like Fink, and then there's activist pressure, which they're also fomenting using the global shapers movement, where they're bringing activists over there to the World Economic Forum summits, and they're training these activists up, and they're coordinating this activism to put pressure on the ground to influence not only your management, but the investment class, in particular, small retail investors. They're going to pressure them. They'll pressure the holders like Buffett to abide. And this kind of like a pincer move. It's coming from two points at once, and you're just going to get squeezed into the game. Definitely.
Okay. Now, how are we able to resist this pincer movement, as you call it? What can we do?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one I get asked all the time. And I'm afraid that I don't have like a 1, 2, 3 punch, easy, answer. Some of the things we can do, though, is I think there's still time for legislative blocking of this, and so I think that, and I've spoken to members of Congress. Last week, I spoke to members of Congress about this. I was invited to speak to them, and I'm going back next month to speak to them again. And I think that legislation can help. I think regional legislation, state and local legislation can actually block some of the moves they're trying to make. I think it was, I just read today that one state is enacting legislation that would bar something. I don't know if it's the ESG itself, but they're doing something that would resist this with legislation. That's one possibility. The other one is if we could get enough stakeholders to understand what's going on, that is stockholders, small, medium, large, and to recognize that it's their money that's being used this way. And they're actually being severely taxed like this. It's one thing, as Milton Friedman pointed out, it's one thing for a CEO to donate money to a cause on his own if it's his own money, but he's donating the money of other people. So he's gaining his virtue points at other people's expense. And so that can be, I think that can be attacked with class action suits. If we can get that going, class action suits. And so we're now in the political and legal realm. And then I think on the more pedestrian route is that people will come to resist the ESG in general in terms of if they have investments at all, try to get out of ESG abiding investments. And I think, frankly, practice the free market as much as you can, and that is to try to avoid these people that are trying to politicize the economy totally. Of course, they want to disappear the civil society and turn it all into the state. In effect, they're trying to get rid of civil society and make it a political sphere. So you have to resist that. That's what Milton Friedman said. They're trying to make everything political, including economics, and that's bad. To resist the ESG, get your money out of them if possible. If you have mutual funds, it's really difficult because they're inextricable. Then, of course, practice the free market on your own, become as entrepreneurial as possible, and try to be independently sustained. That's hard for some people, but if you're going to be resisting this at all, you need to do it such that you are not cancelable. And that's about all I have on it. I mean, do you think of anything else that might work?
No, I don't know, other than maybe education again. It's a matter of both entertaining education that I see at JP Sears, I think his name is, and the one that comes from sites like yours, which is intellectual education, because there are a lot of neutral people out there that are not aware that the climate alarm is actually a fraudulent movement, and so on and so forth. So
right, that would be another thing, is some education about the so-called climate catastrophe, the climate catastrophism that they're using as a pretext to usher this in. Is one of the pretexts. The first one was COVID. But really in the background all the time, really the real first one, the premier, really their main carrying card is, of course, climate change. So frankly, I mean, this almost takes becoming a climate change skeptic, at least in terms of the catastrophism that they're positing as the consequence of whatever climate change we're undergoing. I don't buy the catastrophism. That's the main thing that is allowing them to suggest that they should intervene in the economy in this way, that they should try to control investment, that they should try to control production, that they should try to get rid of oil. All this stuff is based on a tacit belief in the climate catastrophism that they're advancing.
Okay, and in your sort of research and your interpretation of where we're headed on the Great Reset, what's the landscape going to look like in 5 years if there's no opposition to the way things are going?
Well, I think you will see further erosion of the middle class, or in the business class, in particular small business. Especially not all of the middle class, obviously, but the small business aspect, because they're going to start squeezing companies, even of small and middle-sized companies, to abide. and it's hard to abide. That's the thing. Regulations like regulations, whether they're literally legislative or not, or whether they're a matter of de facto regulations through the ESG and the fact that they're starving people of capital, companies of capital, that will affect small and mid-sized businesses as well as large oil companies, and effectively this will erode the buffer between the citizens on the ground and this global hegemon. And I think they're also going to be integrating the public-private partnerships further, such that in effect you have corporations as part of the state. I read by one believer in all this that they don't think that getting corporations and to abide by this on their own voluntarily, that's just the first step. This will also trigger legislation that will make these things legal, so-called. They'll have the force of law. And we saw this with Biden's executive order 14,030, which is pressuring the banking industry to use the ESG as a form of demarcation, so that it would they would drive investment only to the ESG abiding entities. So I see more of that, and more legislation coming down the pike if it's not opposed, more educational propaganda and indoctrination along these lines, which I think is all part and parcel of this. The critical race theory and other forms of wokeness all aid and abet this Great Reset project.
Right. Like, yeah, I saw Biden is pushing the digital currency as well. So
the digital currency could be another thing, and the digital ID. I think the digital ID will come first, because in Canada, there's a bank that's very much on board, and I think it's one of their leading banks, and they're saying that the banking industry will lead with the digital ID, and then they'll attach it to the digital currency. So the digital ID, I believe, has to come first. And that is a very troubling prospect, because you're talking about now having this, what they're calling on the World Economic Forum, a kind of double. You'll have a digital doppelganger, in effect, who's being transacted with by all these different things. You won't do these transactions yourself. You'll have this kind of mediator, this digital mediator. I forget exactly the words they use for it, but that's what it is. And this digital mediator will be a stand-in for you. And with that could come an individual ESG scores.
Yeah, so that's like a China credit score, you're being evaluated all the time.
Exactly.
For everything. So it also intrigues me is this question about how powerful Klaus Schwab is, because now he spoke recently. He said there would be, he thinks there could be, he always uses could, I think, a huge, massive global cyber attack.
Yeah,
that would make the pandemic look like a walk in the park. Now, is he a kind of a mastermind, or he's just throwing it out there? I don't know.
Well, I mean, if you look at some of the things they've done before, for example, and this feeds into conspiratorial thinking, and I'm just putting the history out there. So let people do what they will. But, they did run two simulations leading up to the coronavirus pandemic, Clade X and Event 201. And Event 201 anticipated every element of the COVID crisis, including it being a coronavirus and including it having passive asymptomatic transmission, and including all of the actions taken by the states, including lockdowns and surveillance, biometric surveillance, as in China mostly, and parts of Europe, and also the loss of small businesses, the increasing role of the state in people's economic viability, and the riots and the unemployment. So all of that was predicted. So these people are very prophetic.
Wow, that's staggering, because that makes one rationally, we then have to entertain a conspiracy hypothesis, not only
Yes,
of
you
the
have,
existence of a unipolar deep state, but what you just mentioned, in what they're
yeah, I
planning, what
mean,
they're doing.
it just lends itself to this idea that these people could either be prophets with this prescience of inordinate abilities to predict events, or else they're in on something, that they're actually orchestrating it. So those are the two options. I don't want to adjudicate those two options, because this would just discredit me if I go one way. And if I go the other way, it discredits me amongst the conspiracy so-called thinkers, who then say, oh, see, he's controlled opposition or something like that. I just am not going to adjudicate the question.
Fair enough. Maybe a personal question, if I may. This book, The Great Reset, will be your 12th book.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite among those books, those 12 books? And what's the main
Yeah,
theme of that one?
That's a great question. I'm not happy with Google Archipelago, although it's the one that's done the best in the market. Springtime for Snowflakes is the best writing. Beyond Woke is also some really good writing, I think. And but I think out of the three, I would say probably Beyond Woke, because it handles the topics in both of the other books, and it's a compendium of essays that people can read one essay at a time in any particular order that they wish, without any loss of meaning. So I'd say Beyond Woke is probably the best of them.
Okay. And what about Thought Criminal, or the latest book?
Well, Thought Criminal is a novel, so I don't put it in the same class.
Right.
And I wouldn't put it up against those other books. Novels are much more difficult to get off the ground and to get readership. It's had a smaller readership than the other books by far, but I think it's a good novel.
Thank you. Thank you. Certainly we'll have our viewers and readers look into it. What's going to be the focus in the Great Reset book? And when
That's a great question, and thanks for asking it, because I need to articulate what I'm going to do in that book. I'm going to connect up. I'm going to start with going all the way back to the 16th century, actually, 17th century, 16th, 17th century. I'm going to look at the development of millennial communism from all the way from the 16th century all the way through to today, and to try to see to figure, because I want to situate this great reset within that context of a larger, longer history, and show how they are in effect millennialists like these others, and that they have a millennialist apocalyptic predilections just like the others, and how this will situate it, and that includes Marxism, of course. And I want to show that how the Marxist ethos has been accepted without investigation, in terms of, I think, even corporate capitalists, even major players out there don't know that they unconsciously have absorbed a lot of Marxist precepts, and they're actually operating on those bases. That they think that there is exploitation going on, that the worker is exploited at the point of production, that you need to intervene in order to adjust incomes, that you must do all of these progressive things, otherwise capitalism will crash, because Marx said, it tends towards catastrophe, and it tends towards it has internal contradictions that will have to be, that are going to unravel and prove the system to be fragile and ready to go under at any time. So people have bought that without explicitly having read Marx most of the time. And I want to go into that and how that's happened, and to show it in their ideas and their actions, so through their policies and their behavior.
Thank you. And would there be somewhere along the way a call to action? Because there may be plenty of corporate leaders who haven't truly bought into it in a most way, but they are compelled to provide lip service.
Yes,
You know,
right. So I need,
yeah, go on.
so one needs to give them the ammunition to resist this and to prove through the book that the best method for increasing wealth is to have as free a markets as possible, that this is the way, this is the engine of wealth production, and that diluting capital through these giveaways and through this exorbitant taxation, effectively, is what the ESG score amounts to, is going to make for worse conditions, that it'll create more poverty, that it'll actually increase discontent, that it'll slog down the lower and middle classes, that it will give people less prospects and could create more animus and actually create the kind of thing they're trying to avoid. That's exactly what these interventionists do every time. They produce the conditions that they think they're trying to ameliorate.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, actually. Educating the corporate leaders that they are making the world worse, and not to mention they're not, in addition to making their customers worse off and their shareholders worse off, they're actually also making the world worse rather than better. So
making the world worse. I'm gonna make it clear through really close argumentation that's very accessible. This will be the most accessible book that I write in terms of the language. I am going to do some history just to help people see this in context, because it'll make, when they see how obscene and how absurd the past attempts at things like this have been, then they'll see the current efforts in a new light. That's what I'm hoping.
Oh, I very much looking forward to that, because one thing I've admired of you is the capability and your dedication to investigative research. And if you're going back 400 centuries, it would, I think, produce an outstanding treatise.
Thank you.
And then it reminds me also of another great public intellectual and novelist, philosopher, novelist, Ayn Rand. She said, you know, evil exists because we sanction it in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And if a corporate leader is even doing just lip service, or even our prime minister in Australia, for instance, went to Glasgow and spoke, you know, talked the talk without actually putting it in legislation about climate change. By 2050, we'll do this.
Yes.
But instead of confronting the animal and saying, sorry, you're wrong.
Yes, that's what has to be done, because even the lip service is doing a great disservice, because it's setting the cultural environment for this to come through. Then it'll become inexorable. It will be unstoppable. So it takes some sort of intervention now, and this is not economic intervention. This is an argumentative polemic intervention that has to be undertaken. Somebody's got to do it, and I don't think Glenn Beck's book is like that. I haven't read it, but I doubt that his book is like that. So if you have any ways that I can make the title, make it clear that this is not just another one of these alarmist boogeyman, you know, arguments that I'm at, or rather, not arguments, but rhetorical gestures, that I'm going to argue that this is ironically, this is unsustainable, what they're trying to do. It's actually going to create a ton of misery. So I don't know if maybe that means excluding the word great, the phrase Great Reset from the title. I'm not sure. If I do that, it'll have less readers. That's the thing. I run a risk. I've always done this with my titles. I run a risk of sort of like with Springtime for Snowflakes, which is a book really quite a heavy slog. If you've read it, I don't know. No. It goes into quite a bit of depth about critical theory and postmodern theory, and yet it's called Springtime for Snowflakes. So it doesn't sound like it's that deep, but it is. And when I mean deep here is that it plumbs into serious ideas. So similarly, I've done that with Google Archipelago. Well, Google Archipelago does have a sort of ponderous sound to it. But the point is that I need to get audience. And so titles are very important.
Well, let's yeah, go on. Sorry.
Go, no, you go ahead.
Let's invite our readers and viewers. I mean, you know, so the Great Reset is thinking on my feet here. The Great Reset is the path to poverty and misery. Could be,
Yes.
you know, rather than Marxism, capitalism, it's kind of economic undertones. So,
yeah, I see. Yes, I'm open to crowdsourcing this, if you will, because there's a lot of stuff out there, and a lot of my, you know, the people that are friends of mine and followers and Facebook and Twitter, they have great ideas. So I'm not saying this is going to be a cooperative effort. I'm not a collectivist as an author. It'll be my book. But I'm willing to get some input on that because I need to sharpen it and all at the same time I want it to sound weighty enough that people are going to take it seriously, but also attractive enough so that it'll be picked up, because this is important. This has to be done. Somebody's got to do it.
I agree. I mean, you know, as a novelist myself, I had invited beta readers on the manuscript. I actually call them alpha readers because they took few chapters at a time as it was being done. So maybe that's an option to see.
Well, having read what you've written, and I think it's very admirable, I would like to invite you to be an alpha reader, actually.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd be delighted and honored.
Okay.
To do so, and let's on this show invite other people if, you know, if they meet your criteria. Okay, thank you.
Yes, so I mean, let's hear from others, because, you know, I'm just one person and I'm trying to cover a huge waterfront, and it's not easy.
Okay. Anything else you would want to add today before we conclude?
Yeah, I mean, just keep your chin up, because I think we can beat this. I do think the human spirit is indomitable, can't be defeated, and liberty wins in the end. It can't, you know, totalitarianism is just full of, you want to talk about contradictions, it is full of contradictions, and it's full of lies. And so we can win and we can defeat this behemoth, but we need to be arduous in our battle. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for that inspiring message. And we're quite grateful then to have had such a distinguished guest on our show. That's all for today. And I hope we'll see you again on the show, Michael.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.